Okay, there we go. All right, it's going. Okay, so we've already kind of discussed it, but this is going to be on the on extroverted feeling
This is
as
the
a
beginning
cognitive
of the
function.
video, everybody.
Yes, this is the beginning of the video.
All right, go ahead.
We've already had a prior exchange of disclaimers and introductions, so we can bypass that by not recording it. Um, okay, so this one's on extroverted feeling, and I'm kind of it's like NI. We talked about NI being mysterious in the last video, um, because neither of our types really utilize it. With any kind of like natural facility or anything like that. So different types will be more or less gifted in its use, I suppose. But anyway, this is not on NI. This is on extroverted feeling. Trying to figure right, but it jumps off. Our prior discussion about NI then leads into the discussion about FE. So if you'd watch the prior video, it would make more sense. Of course, now I'm just fucking
You
babbling
have
out
to go
disclaimers.
back and watch it because
Yeah,
you're going to be missing out on a lot of qualifications, caveats, and and tangents that you need to fully understand all the qualifications, caveats, and tangents you're going to get in this video.
right, exactly. Well, I mean, that's what defining is all about. But in any case, okay. So I had an experience. So this is more of my own, like, So first, I'm drawing on an anecdote, right? Because I don't really have a lot of FE.
So you're
I
starting with an essay example, and you're going to draw
yes,
from it or engage everybody with it as an NI rule of sorts.
yeah, yeah. I mean, or just try to establish like a definition, or try to
That's
see.
normal for NTPs. We start with our experience and we test it to see if it works as a general rule or not.
Right. But I've got a friend, so I kind of could see FE working. I could see it operating. Like this guy, I'm like watching him, and he's just kind of sitting there, and we're all talking about stuff. Like we were having a conversation about, I can't remember exactly what it was, something pessimistic, but it was like we were trying to have fun, but of course, in typical NTP fashion, we can't have fun. We just end up talking about the dark side of things, or we
Was the
can't
topic why everything sucks?
why everything sucks, and why we were trying to drink and have a good time, and we were just like the whole time we were just like why like it just engaged more of our analytical detachment. So but in any case, this guy, I could kind of see, I was just kind of observing him, and he kept asking questions about, like, how is everyone feeling, or he's like cleaning up the table in front of us, and he's asking whether we want we want him to fix us a drink, and he's like, but I could kind of see, yeah, and there was a neuroticism about it that I kind of found fascinating. Like I want to make sure everyone's okay, kind of thing. And I don't really engage in that frame, I guess. But enough to see him doing it. He was almost like trying to regulate the emotion, in the room. Like he was trying to lead us toward a pleasant experience in some way by trying to regulate the emotion in the room. And I was kind of enjoying just watching him do it because, it's, but, um, but it's,
He's been the ultimate team player by being the person who took on the responsibility of host.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly what it was. And, um, I, he was doing it more or less effectively, but there was the impulse there, that there's a certain impulse behind it, like a consideration of others and and their experience. But it's not just that. I mean, because you know, FE to a certain extent seems to me to be about, not necessarily about conformity, but at least a sensitivity to like what the norms are in any given situation, and then an adaptation, a sense of how to adapt one's presentational self to those norms. Does that make
I mean,
sense?
I would say I think the best, most understandable by everybody word for it is there's a fixation with being a team player with FE. And the thing is, there's this guy who is being the ultimate team player, taking on the role of being the host. There may be people there present who are like, "Will you sit down and stop fussing? I can't relax until you relax."
Yes.
So there are people that have kind of a counterintuitive response to his efforts, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Now,
but
Eric, I have to say, like, that directly will contrast with me because so like the other day I was having to complete some like social chore task. I had to go interact with I had to go well, it involved some level of interaction from what I can remember. And the insight that I had was I feel like I have enough FE to know like what um, the norms are in a given exchange. But I had this thought. It was like we have this almost default rule of like being nice to one another, and I think that that's about respecting each other and everything. So I agree with it. But then I had a thought. It was like, why do we have the default to be nice, to people by as sort of an automatic norm when you don't actually know the person you're interacting with if it's a stranger. So if I choose to be nice to them, there's actually a risk that I shouldn't be nice to them because they could just be like a serial killer or something. you know so
well, it's true.
yeah
Most of the time,
the rule of
um,
be nice by default just seems, but it's not about logic at the level of FE, I think. um, you
well,
know
right, because it's like these people have varying ways in which there's sort of like a range of behavior in which they can acceptably deal with you depending on your respective positions in a given context. So if I'm
yeah,
calling like a customer service person, they have a range of behavior they can be able to deal with me in, right?
yeah, right, exactly,
They
yeah,
can, in other words, they can either try harder to help me or less hard to help me. They
yeah,
can be more pleasant or less pleasant.
right,
And the thing is, it turns out in situations like that are really TE situations, generally FE is the right function to use. That if you go in there and
yes,
schmooze that and sort of go in and and put yourself at their mercy and say, I'm having so much problem here. I really hope you can help me because and then all of a sudden you get much better results than if you go in like
exactly,
a raging bull.
yeah, no,
On the
yeah,
other hand, there are times when anger or sort of stick side of FE rather than the carrot side of FE is
yeah.
effective, but you've got to have the right case and the right situation. Trouble? No, you can't. You can't. Go away. Shoot. You're
so
not
the,
allowed inside.
so there's like with FE there's like the underlying sense of utility of being nice, or is that TE?
I mean, I think both FE and TE are utilitarian kinds
Yeah,
of function. They say there are ways of interfacing with dynamic systems to accomplish outcomes you want to accomplish. So the thing is, sometimes FE will backfire if the other people are not being team players. If the other people have their precise agenda and they're not interested in being a team player and they're not interested in things being fair,
right.
then that eat you alive with your two FE.
Is FE about fairness as well, or is that more? Could that touch on multiple? Like, could that touch on different functions aside from FE? I feel like
I think
F.
that
Yeah, I feel like FI or TI or I mean, I think many different functions could be considered or be concerned with fairness too. So I'm
Yeah.
very concerned with fairness. Uh,
but it's a matter of how you frame what fairness is, man.
Yeah.
yeah,
So how would you say FE frames fairness?
Because sometimes FE
No.
isn't fair. Like sometimes FE can be manipulative.
oh, that much I've picked up on. Yeah, I definitely know that
Yeah.
can be that's the dark side. You know.
Yeah.
Um,
But so to be fair, I think sometimes it's trying to be warm and kind.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I've noticed that in its most cautious form, FE tends to frame things for the other person so that the other person gets to be in the position of higher status. In
Yeah.
other words,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
a FE tool person will talk to somebody about a subject the FE tool person knows about, but won't be particularly interested in laying claim to, I know this, I know that, I'm making statements. They'll be happy to let the other person think that they're informing them. So even if it's like, let's say I'm FE Tool, or let's say I'm me and Rachel, and I'm telling Rachel something she already knows, she might go, oh, that's very, very interesting. She's not going to say explicitly,
Yeah.
this is news to me, but she's not going to inform me explicitly either that I already know this. You're telling me something I already know. Because she's concerned about how I might feel about how she might be perceiving her and my respective hierarchical statuses and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, I feel like that's what. Yeah.
Unconsciously?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I mean, the engine of it might be unconscious, like, you probably haven't put it all in words, but
Right.
the matters you're paying attention to you're paying attention to them consciously.
True.
Yeah. So like if we were to compare FE and TI, it's like if the choice had to be made between truth and harmony, TI chooses truth over harmony and FE chooses harmony over truth.
No, I think it's better to say that TI. First of all, the TI chooses correctness over.
Not necessarily truth.
Okay?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
The thing is, what TI is most good at is saying no because, and as a consequence, it's
And FE is good at saying yes.
Yeah, it's used a lot to negate, whereas FE is used to actually get done. Because TI is a deliberation function that determines the status of things, whereas FE is an interface function that engages with the dynamic system for some purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fraught effort from the very beginning to even compare FE and TI because they're entirely different things. But I've noticed with different types, um, you know, I feel like maybe what FE might be associated with too, going on what we were saying, is not wanting to make an offense as well. And there are situations where offense is just created when facts are stated or perspectives are stated, and so that's the only reason I compare. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a relationship between the two that's defined by their slots. So let's say you're talking about 2-3, as it is with both me and Rachel. I'm 2 TI, she's 2 FE. I'm 3 FE, she's 3 TI. So what that basically means is because I'm using TI as a tool function, I'm quite confident in my ability to be correct.
Yeah.
And so I really feel like everything's come together when I'm not only correct, but I'm broadly, that correctness is broadly embraced because I've successfully been either inclusive enough about that correctness, or because I've been self-deprecating and deflecting of credit enough, or some other things that make it more palatable to someone's ego than just me saying I'm right and everybody else is wrong, which tends to just make people hate me. So
yeah. And I feel like if you've got TI tool or TI primary, there's probably enough FE tact there to not just explicitly state I'm right and you're wrong, but like
I don't know. In some ways, NTPs seem more tactful to me, or at least than I am tactful.
Yeah. Maybe it's an SI restraint there. I don't know. Maybe if that holds any water. Maybe
I think being a deliberation type first and an action type as a tool function means your action taking is an instrumental value. So you don't necessarily feel any need to extrovert your conclusion drawing processes that have gone on in your head.
Yeah.
The SI third is a lot stronger than SI fourth. So the TI DOM, you're able to parse shit a lot more deeply in your head than I am before you say it out loud.
Yeah.
As a consequence, just being quieter means taking fewer FE risks in general. And so, as a consequence, NTP is much more likely to rub people the wrong way than NTP is.
Yeah. And it's also the fact too, it's like, it's called introverted thinking, for a reason. It is more of a, there's not as much expression involved in it externally. It's that inherently introverted process of, like you said, the word you use is parsing, which I think is definitely a good word for it. And so it just lends to having all the outward manifestations of introversion, which is not being as expressive. Um,
Yeah, but then, you can see how it plays out so differently in the second slot, where I'm more likely to,
yes, yeah, for sure, yeah, of course, and you have tertiary FE too. So, but the types are I mean,
yeah, we can talk and understand each other, which is something that neither type experiences a whole lot of in the world. I suspect INTP realizes a lot sooner than people aren't understanding that than ENTP does.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think that's also why INTPs can appear quieter too, because there's been the repeated realization over time, just experientially, that if I go too deep, because the qualifying like feature of TI, both for ISTPs and INTPs, from what I've observed, is like there's because I've got a good friend who's an INTP as well, is there's there's a exploration of like unnecessary depth. Does that make sense? Like it's necessary depth, but TE would regard it as too deep because it's not useful to the achievement of any real world result. FE wouldn't regard it as useful because it's not really going to be understood or whatever. It's like, he'll both him and I will do things where we're trying to,
You drown in a node. You drown in a single node that only has minimal impact in the argument as a whole. This is something I've
yes, that's very much the case.
They want to
Yes.
get stuck making sure they fully argue down and completely want argument X or whatever. But
Yes.
argument X, to fully do that and completely argue it out and win that point, means to use way too much of your time on something that has way too little overall impact on the round. Because INTPs countervalue NI. NI is about what's most relevantly impactful rather than what's most correct. Whereas TI is like, well, let me make sure if I get this node exactly correct, then I can move on. Well, sometimes you just have to throw some dirt on it and move on.
No, yeah, for sure. No, that's I in a lot of settings that is very much the case. But what if like I know with like at least with ENFJs and ESFJs, there's the inferior. I think they both have inferior TI. Um, and so, what if either of those FE DOM types recognize through FE that they have to be logically valid? Would that make them appear more TI because they'll adopt the FE norm of logical validity? Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
I mean, here's the deal. It's perfect example was a lady in Arizona. She was an ESFJ. She couldn't figure out, well, she was supposed to add 10% surcharge, so I was getting it to go. They did 10% surcharge as a tip for the people who work at the Waffle House. Anyway, I said, fine, okay, no problem, 10% surcharge for a tip. I probably would have left tip anyway, who cares? But she kept trying to charge me 110% surcharge.
Yeah.
And I was trying to explain to her that, no, you're not doing it right. You're not doing the math. You keep adding my bill again to it in addition to the 10% for some reason.
Uh-huh.
But instead of listening to me try to explain to her, like, no, just listen to me. I'll tell you. It's very straightforward. Okay, I'll show you exactly how. She didn't want anything like that, right?
Yeah.
But she was calling her boss, even though it was like 3 a.m, because she had written down on a piece of paper the steps of what to do to execute this thing. It wasn't working out for her. She called her boss and her boss confirmed that I was
right.
telling her.
Yeah.
But the thing is, so what happens when pressured to use her TI in that instance? She doesn't. She uses her FE and seeks to find confirmation from another person.
Yes, of course.
First she tries to use demonstrative SE. She tried to repeatedly do the thing that she's written down, all the steps, make sure she's followed them exactly the right way, and just execute it. And she's coming out with the same thing, right?
Right.
So then she throws away TI and she throws away TE. Her solvency is to call another person. She might have TE'd it by saying, okay, well, let me tackle the question from a blank slate perspective and how would I obtain this? Well, I could just ask several of the customers maybe and get confirmation and then check their answers against each other independently, and that would probably be a good enough heuristic. That would be a TE hybrid.
Yes, it would.
Hybrid approach
Yes.
rather than straight FB approach. She said we just call our boss and so our boss answers the phone over and over again and confirms that I was right. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's what ends up happening. We challenge it.
But Eric, this is the funny thing is you say that FE is associated with status. So she wasn't willing to take, so she looks to others for that validation, but she wasn't willing to look to you. That's the interesting thing with FE is it's like, if I'm willing to trust my boss, why am I not willing to trust this guy? You know, but she had to go to her boss, which has the which is to her the higher authority because that's just that under your definition.
I mean, she's trying to avoid a stretch of time in which she's not sure if she got ripped off or not.
Yeah. Yeah. It just kind of tied back into the whole FE status consciousness thing that I know you've mentioned previously.
In that instance, I think it's like there wasn't any kind of FE social status thing going on in that situation, really. In fact, if anything, she was kind of ignoring the social status stuff, which would say, don't call someone at 3 a.m, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Don't call someone 3 a.m. about a basic math question. But so in that regard, she was ignoring those kind of FE considerations, but she was making sure she didn't get in trouble. And that's the other thing about FE.
Yeah.
FE people are about getting in trouble. It's this weird thing that we carry all the way into adulthood with us.
Yeah.
Each time I feel like we're the kind of people who somebody else gets in trouble, basically. Although other people probably feel like I'm getting them in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe there's a respect for rules there too. Would you agree then?
There's an assumption that no matter how high up you are on the social hierarchy, there's someone with more authority and power than
you. Yeah. Right. So taking others as a source of validity is based on authority rather than competence then?
Well, yeah, I mean, FE authority stems from the letters after your name. It's the same sort of authority the TE looks to.
Yeah.
Except it looks to somewhat different cues, like how someone's dressed more than the letters after their name, or it's like how articulate you are. So one of the good ways to convey a certain kind of FE effect upon, say, police officers or other authority-style figures is to be very articulate, maybe even excessively articulate.
Yeah.
While at the same time not sounding like you're trying to be articulate, it's just like it's naturally occurring, and you expect these people to keep up, and they're not quite sure why they're not understanding. All of a sudden, there's an affordance of you, like the status of, oh, this is an eccentric intellectual, they're not a threat, right?
Yeah.
So that's playing an FE vector there,
Yeah, for sure. I do notice when under stress when interacting with like I've obviously like everyone have been pulled over a number of times in the past while driving. I do notice enough of my FE senses will kick in, and I can just say, oh, my strategy is always to just be like, all right, I'll just admit that I did something wrong, and then he won't give me a ticket, because then it's like, if you fight him on it, he's going to give you a ticket automatically. Like that strategy,
So, and I take the same approach. And not that I got pulled over in a long time, but if I were to, I'd just be very polite.
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't try to get into any problems. But, you sort of, oh, hello, sir. Good day, sir. Why?
Yeah.
Me, It's like,
yeah, it's just, with them, it's just not, it's a certain personality type that cops end up being, and it just doesn't work to really fight them on anything, They get very sensitive about that.
Here's the challenge that INTPs have on an FE ground that the ENTPs don't have. So INTPs, with any tool, they necessarily, it's like every single one of them I've ever met pretty much does it. They'll start a sentence and you know what? They're going to go back and then they're going to restart the sentence and then, but after them starting the first way again, shit, right? It makes a person seem nervous or intimidated, even if they're not.
Yeah.
So it's like authority figures are, if they're if they're asswipes, they're probably going to think they're successfully getting at you just because of the way you naturally talk and push at it. But if they're nice, they're probably going to think you're scared and be like, it's okay.
Yeah, they're
even though it's indicative of you using any tool, not any emotional state, bro.
yeah. So with me, I'm always just kind of like, I just put on that. I notice that putting on that front of conciliation is just best with them, and then they'll just stop bothering you. Oh, okay, he's respectful, so he won't. He's polite and respectful to me, so that's just what. Whereas if
the advantage the ISP has is he's polite, respectful, and dear Lord, is he taking a long time to say this. Okay, you're fine, sir. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Yeah. And it works, I mean, there have been multiple times I've been pulled over where I just didn't get a ticket because, but inside, I will tell you, what I present externally to a cop is not necessarily what I feel internally about the cop. Because, like, my normal response would just be like, well, why'd you pull me over? Or do you have cause? Or, something like that, which is what I want to do. I just realized through SI and FE that, or even TI too, recognizing cause and effect, it's just like, that's not going to work. And obviously you're going to save so much money if you just be nice to them. So you don't have to go to court. You don't have to get a ticket. So just do that. And with one minor instance now, if we're talking about like tyranny of some kind or a corrupt cop or something like that, which is rare, which doesn't happen all that much, which I can't even see from the outside anyway, that'd be different. There may be some principle that I would consider.
Where I've encountered the cops, I've been like, yeah, I fucked up. I did that thing. You got me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I did fuck up. It's not like the cops have been pulling me over for no goddamn reason at all. I did some fuck up thing, and then they pulled me over.
Yeah.
And so it's like it was beyond the normal thing that was happening around me, or else they wouldn't have pulled me over. Cops around here, at least with me, have never been overzealous. And it's like if I'm getting messed with, I fucked up in some way. I did something.
Yeah.
So what are you gonna say then? You can't. It's like you got me.
Yeah. I'd either, in most cases, I'd just be like, yes, I fucked up, or the rule tells me that I fucked up, even if the rule is arbitrary. But most of the time, the rules make sense to me with road regulations. I'm not going to make any major argument against any one of them I could point out. But with those, it's like,
we're getting pulled over for going 56 in a 55 zone. It'd be one thing. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But if I'm getting pulled over, last time I got pulled over for speeding, I was going up over 90 on Loop 395. I was in my ex-wife's car, and it's like it just you never felt like you were going very fast in it, and there weren't any other cars around. I didn't even realize I was going 90.
Yeah, exactly. My car's like that.
I was like, oh shit, I'm going over 90.
Yes.
Yeah, you pulled me over.
Yeah, I know. It's. I don't think that the lack of, perhaps with NTPs, like the lower FE, and I mean, would you consider tertiary, like, to have a function? I mean, obviously, I think a function in a tertiary position is pretty strong. I mean, it's nowhere near as like conscious or strong as the first two, but if you've got 8, I mean, third has got to be pretty. I mean, I notice SI is okay with me, but
you have to deal with the SI thing. INTPs are markedly better at memorizing shit than ENTPs.
Oh, I watched that in one of your videos I watched recently. You were talking about how with some INTPs, you could give them a stanza of a certain like song, and then it's like the auditory processing. It's like there's an auditory imprint that's left by the lyrics, and then so I was kind of like
really fast.
Yeah. Which ties into the short-term memory aspect of like the genealogy questions too that you do.
Well, see, that actually, it sort of ties into that. But the thing that happens is the INTPs won't have to keep anything in their memory because they will keep up the whole time. So they'll be right with me as I'm going down the thing. However, at the end, if you were to ask them to repeat what it was, they would actually be able to repeat the whole thing. and they'd be able to repeat it more than they'd be able to repeat random shit on a short-term memory test.
Yeah.
So it's not just short-term memory. In other words, it's coded short-term memory because there's this tree relationship you visualize as you're talking it through.
Yeah. No, I will say this is a side note, not necessarily related to FE, but more SI. But I've got a friend because when we were in middle school, we had both done theater, and it was relatively easy for me to memorize all my lines. But this guy, even years after, I don't know what function you'd call this, but even years after the play had ended, we at this point we hadn't performed that theater piece for like fucking 4 or 5 years. And he has a freakishly strong, whatever kind of memory that is, long-term memory or working memory. But he'd be able to still recite the entire play, even his lines. Of course, that's not any function. That's just a freakish. I acknowledge that's a rare case.
There's almost certainly SI front stack. So.
Oh yes, I mean, God, even the songs, the lyrics from the songs in the play, he'd be able to recite always. But in terms of,
I remember shit from my teenage years a lot better than I remember shit afterwards. So like I'll remember all the lyrics from a song that I knew the lyrics to as a teenager, but I will not. The new lyrics that I'm hearing in songs won't stick with me very much.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to be tested on recall, then I could do. I don't know if I'd be able to keep like multiple stanzas in memory, but I'd certainly be able to keep one. But I don't know. This is the long-term memory thing rather than the short-term. Anyway.
It's like, look, there's two kinds of SI memory. And I suspect that the other kind of SI memory is probably a steeper learning curve for INTP, which is muscle memory. So I have tried to play Power Tools with an INTP before, which is a game I played as I went across the country and met with people. If, depending on the circumstance, maybe we bust out some power tools I brought with me and make some shit,
Yeah.
You don't want to play power tools with an ISP. They break and or lose your power tools, and just whatever they make is just a complete fucking, looks like a preschooler, right? So you just don't even bother, right? So that's the kind of muscle memory stuff, the SI stuff that if you are, say, an ISTJ, your hands become very familiar quickly with the way a tool feels and works, and it becomes committed into your processes, and you always follow the same processes. And then there's kind of like a middle ground thing, which is musical instruments, where both INTPs and ENTPs can certainly get very good at playing musical instruments.
Yeah.
That's a lot of muscle memory, but it's much more linked to NI than is the other kind of muscle memory, which is much more linked to SE.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The great thing about I noticed though with like comparing ENFJs and so ESFJs have the secondary SI, ENFJs dominate with FE, and then INFJs have the auxiliary FE, and then ISFJs have the auxiliary FE as well. But I notice like SI to me, if I'm comparing myself to those types, especially like an ISFJ or an ESFJ, with the secondary or dominant and SI, my long-term memory, and experiential memory of like specific events and experiences, that comes very in only momentary flashes. I do have them. I mean, like if I'm going through the day, I'll have certain moments where I have momentary flashes of an SI event. But it's not like I'm living in an SI world of, sort of memory, I guess.
Let me share a very compelling SI story. It just happened this evening that I've never shared before. Once a story exemplifies something well, I'll repeat it in lots of different contexts.
Oh yes, it's very useful.
As a good example, right? But this is one I've never used before because it just happened. So about 5 days ago, I don't know how we got in a conversation, more or less 5 days ago, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 days ago. Rachel and I got in a conversation about our trip to Hawaii that we took, not this past February, but the one before. And I asked her, because I was musing on how there was this one moment that really stuck in my head. I said, well, what moment sticks in your head, Rachel? And she said, the changing weather. Of course, that's not a moment. It's true that the weather was constantly changing. It
Yes.
was rain, it was sunny, it was windy, it was still, it was hot, it was cold. The
Yes.
weather was all over the place. But certainly not a moment. And then I said, well, I have my moment, and I told her what it was. And then tonight, out of the blue, my dad at dinner says, you guys know what moment I remember most about our trip to Hawaii? And I think it were a couple of possible things, and I'm just sort of silent. Like, I'm not sure what you would remember exactly.
Right. You're not in his head.
He comes down and he goes, 3, 2, 1. And his moment was exactly the same moment that I had said to Rachel, which was when we were all sitting at this one, like, super old-fashioned McDonald's on this one part of the Big Island. The sun was setting. We were on the way back from the volcano. And it was like a period of respite after a long day of activities.
Yeah. Right. That's very SI.
I don't know. My dad and I both picked the exact same moment from the trip as the most memorable moment of the trip, and it was a full week's long trip, right? So
Yeah.
there were lots and lots of equivalently lengthened moments to choose from, and my dad and I both picked exactly the same one, totally independently. And Rachel still hasn't given me an actual opinion.
Well, what Rachel's like with NI, dominant NI would be perceiving the sort of the weather seems to be a concrete detail of it, but the weather is very different. The whole atmosphere is very different in Hawaii too. So it's more, it's a remarkably different kind of detail of the experience, which I can see.
Right, and I can come up with an answer that's NI. My NI answer is looking at the spiders. Right? Looking and playing with the spiders. Looking at and playing with the spiders. So
Yeah, I probably remember something like that.
Spiders, I tried to catch bugs and put in their webs. And then Rachel said, and feeding the birds, which is not something that I remembered until she mentioned it.
I mean, and going back to FE, it's like you say that you like playing with the spiders. I feel like that there's going to be some norm awareness with FE that's, oh God, I hate spiders, or spiders are gross, or spiders are, why would you want to play with a spider, or something like that. Does that, am I just being superficial in that way of characterizing
it? Not necessarily, because it's true that FE tool might very well feel bad for the bugs that you're feeding to the spider.
Oh, I certainly would. Yeah.
I mean, like Rachel feels like there's a fairly complicated FE-FI relationship between her and each of the cats. If she has to do something that the cat doesn't like, she's of the opinion the cat's holding a grudge against her for a while afterwards, which is certainly possible. But I mean, she interprets a lot of shit like that. She worries about if she offended the cat,
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's for you.
Exactly.
FE tools a person who apologizes to objects when they bump into them.
Yeah. No, and it lends occupationally, like I feel like FE very much lends well to roles as like therapists or psychologists, or even, I mean, it's all about modeling, maybe not modeling per se, maybe that's not the right word, but really trying to relate to the internal experience, maybe of another person, in a deep way.
I don't think so. I think that,
yeah, maybe I would.
It's very type specific. Like, therapist uniquely is specific to either your type or your situation. When I got marriage counseling with my second wife, we had an ENFP therapist who was a former debater who did a pretty good job of advocating on the ex-wife's behalf. Because I knew going in there, I needed a strong therapist that I wasn't going to roll over.
Yes, that's very important, I think, well, I mean, it's important in general, but
it made for an odd dynamic in the marriage counseling, right?
Yeah. Oh,
it was
yeah. Most certainly.
Against them.
Yes. That's a good thing though about the disagreement aspect of that is it's deliberative, and so you get perspectives that are kind of competing with each other and trying to figure out what is the most. I guess that's what. So, but yeah, no, but. Yeah, maybe not empathy, because what I'm pointing to there is trying to understand the internal experience of another person. Not so much. I don't know if that's. I mean, that's empathy, not FE.
What did this therapist do? What did that marriage counselor suggest? He started telling us about dietary things, like, well, we need to change our diet. Like, this is going to help. our diet had absolutely nothing to do with anything we were telling him about our problems, right? So like he's not gleaning this information about how our diet's going to change ours based on what we're telling him. He's taking it straight from his NI belief and projecting it onto us, even though we've given
Yes.
him no reason to think that our diet contributes to our marriage difficulties at all.
Yes. That is a very NI belief. I mean, the idea that something is remote and I mean, not really unrelated, because I mean, I think it is related, but distantly related is like diet. Something like that can have an effect on the dynamic of the relationship in some way. I mean, I can see if you both like going out to restaurants together, but you like entirely different cuisines. I could see how that could cause conflict.
Yeah,
But
that wasn't the case.
no, no, that
He said us we should eat certain kinds of magical foods that make us more, I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, having a good marriage. I mean,
Well, next time I'm having relationship troubles, I'll just pump myself full of lactose or probiotics or something, and we'll see if that actually results in any betterment.
and it's not like he was telling us these foods were going to address any specific problem either. It's not like we were saying, "Oh, we're not feeling horny for each other. Can you give us some aphrodisiac food?" He was just saying, in general, what you need is to eat this kind of food so you'll be centered properly or whatever, and then everything will fall into place as a general kind of cascading rule. It was like, I told him at the beginning too. I'm like, I looked at your website. Don't you start in with any of your diet shit on it.
Yeah, yeah, that seems very odd to me. I mean,
He waited a few sessions, but he finally couldn't help himself. He just
maybe it was because your stomach chakra was like not your. I don't know. I'm joking, but I mean, I really am joking because I don't believe in chakras necessarily, but um, what depending on how they're defined, but that's a separate issue. But yeah, that's odd. That I mean, you know, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't look into it.
I've had a personal therapist who was an ENFP as well. He was the one who told me everybody's always feeling something all the time emotionally. It's like he says, "Well, what do you feel? What are you feeling right now?" And I said, "Nothing. I just feel normal," which is to say, I'm not feeling anything. Really.
Uh, Based on that,
And
though,
he said, "No. Everybody's feeling something all the time. Only sociopaths don't feel
yeah.
things." And
So with
huh.
feeling, it's like maybe assuming what he says is valid in terms of we're all feeling something at specific times. Maybe what FE is feeling is what other people are feeling.
I mean, that's not how it works for me. In
Yeah,
other words, I'm not especially aware of how you are feeling right now, or of how you feel about me or anything.
yeah,
I'm more aware of how I'm going to play on the video, but even then, my awareness it has blinders on. Like
oh yeah,
I only I only care about the parts of how I'm going to appear that I care about, and I sort of assume that how I appear to be perceived is how it's going to be perceived. It's kind of a selfish, childish function of third slot, you know.
yeah.
At
Mine,
least it's that way with FB. I think SI's childishness probably expresses itself as being kind of fussy about having your comforts, you know.
I mean, the way I would describe my relationship with FE is like I would take a term you use, which is fussy, but also in a previous video I've watched, it's described FE is described as like the INTP's demon in some sense. I don't know if you agree with that characterization. I don't know if I do.
I mean, I find that metaphor
Yeah, I think it's very metaphorical.
not to be a very good one
Yeah,
because it's more like your underappreciated your underappreciated friend who if you set aside your compulsion towards your reflective attentional habits for a second and just give Joe a little bit more time to help you out, you'd be much better off. That's how I feel about my fourth slot. That It's just like
SI.
Joe's. Every time I invite him over, my life's better after he stopped by because he helped me fix something or whatever.
Yeah, I
But
usually feel that way about
instead,
Effie.
you would invite him over enough. Not that I dislike him, just that it never seems fun to invite him over.
No, that's definitely not a source of comfort for me, but rather, as you say, of growth. I mean, like no, it's not a love hate relationship. I don't really. I'm mostly indifferent to the fourth to Effie. I don't really. I'm not antagonistic against it, and I'm not.
It's like self-deprecating. The fourth sense of humor is self-deprecating function. So it's where we're willing to say, yeah, I'm not any good at that. That's fine. I don't claim to be any good at
Yeah.
You know what I think of when I think of Effie? I think of Sally. I think of Sally Fields winning an award, and she's like, "You like me. You really like me."
Yeah.
I feel like
You point.
Effie is very much like that.
Yeah, you point to the another aspect of it that I've seen, which is like maybe some approval seeking, or like the desire for some external approval. Maybe is that what you're pointing to?
Yeah. I think I'm a people pleaser. I mean, I can definitely say that I'm a
Yeah.
people pleaser. Yeah, yeah. Having that tool function, Effie.
I mean, I think FE tool with NI instead of SI makes a person especially um, responsiveness oriented rather than initiative oriented.
Oh, okay.
Like the SI person already has in mind things that are going to happen now, with an hour from now, things that just happened an hour prior to now. They have that ongoing in their head. So when you engage them, they're responding with a more anchored self, from a position of a more anchored self. Whereas the NIFE is just kind of floating there, waiting for things to happen to know about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there could be no greater difference. I mean, even if they lead with the same function, the way the auxiliary function interacts with the dominant function really makes for entirely different types when comparing ENF, for instance, ENFJs with ESFJs, or INFJs with ISFJs. I mean, they're entirely different types and we regard them as different types for a reason, because I get entirely different signals from both of those types for sure.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing is, here we are, INTP, ENTP. In a lot of ways, people would say these guys are very similar. They speak in very similar fashion. They talk about similar things. They seem to understand each other on the same against the same standard. So we're judging things against basically the same standard, that it has to make good sense, and we shouldn't make too excessive claims. That we should understand things as reflecting, their static symbols as reflecting a process more effectively rather than less effectively. That basic kind of approach, that there are preferable and less preferable interpretations, and we can know that by parsing. That's our
Right.
basic frame of reference.
Yeah.
So people will note that similarity a lot. The thing is, the difference between a deliberator and an action type is actually quite dramatic, but because we both take the same kind of deliberated action as a majority of the time out in the world, the product of our action isn't going to look very different from each other. So we're more different from each other as people than anything we do as subjects will look different from each other to others.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that first, do you think there is such a thing as normal? And do you think that FE inherently believes there is such a thing as normal?
I mean, certainly FESI does.
Yeah. Agreed.
Like ESSJ and ISFJ will say things like, "Who does that? That's not normal."
Yes,
Stop
they do
it.
say that. They do say that. Yes.
You're weird. Don't embarrass me.
Oh my gosh.
That's the selfish. That's the selfish part. Yeah, Rachel said that FA is not always about fairness. It can be selfish too, which is the me aspect of that is the selfish part maybe of FE. But
Well, from their perspective, they're not being selfish because they're judging you against the same metric they're judging everybody else.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the only reason you call them selfish is because they care more about you because you're their loved one in their family. So obviously they're going to make extra sure with you that you don't come across weird people. It's for your own good. Right?
That's such effie dom stuff.
That's how.
Oh no, that very much is.
Yeah.
That very much is. What's weird? I mean,
also for your own good. FE and I can also be for your own good, but it's much less concerned about how you're acting right now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I feel like there's this trend where a lot of types like that are very dissimilar get lumped in together as being in the same tribe or in the same group. And I mean, there couldn't be any greater difference between intuitive FE users and then the sensing variant. And then it's the same. I mean, and then leading with SE is entirely different. I mean, I feel like sensors just get put into the same bucket in that way. But I mean, the differences between them couldn't be more obvious if you're just defining the functions specifically, you know.
Yeah, I think it's better to group them as meta-analysts, INTP, ENTP, INFJ, ENFJ, because at least all those types are fundamentally map-based in both their dominant and second function. And then the analysts, where you got your communication function first, then an experiential function. You got your executives, where you've got an experiential function first, then a communication function, and your executors, which have experience functions in both. So you could say the executors share the following thing. They either want to tell people what and how to do things or be told what and how to do.
Yeah.
The SFPs want concrete directions, coordinated instructions.
SFPs, do they prefer TI or TE? Because I don't know. Are they TE? Okay, that makes sense.
And so it's like ESFPs want to ideally figure out how to do it themselves, or possibly even tell others how to do it, but ultimately need to be told how to do it because they're third slot.
Yeah.
Whereas both the STJs, ISTJs are much more like willing to work with you, but ultimately you need to have them tell you how to do shit.
Yeah.
ESTJs just go ahead and tell everybody how to do shit.
Yeah. I mean, the difference though is like with ISTJs, you give them a good reason, then they'll follow your rule. Perhaps with the FE prefers, you give them a good reason, they're still not going to follow your rule because your rule isn't associated with the requisite authority and status according to hierarchy. So they'll not defer to that necessarily. Whereas I notice with STJs, it's like, oh, there's logic there. I'll go with that. But there's a hesitancy with any kind of TI explanation for things. It's usually not really regarded very highly.
I mean, the bottom line is all the executor types, SFPs and STJs, understand that things get done through ordination. That if you're
definitely.
It's going to be accomplished, it's got to be accomplished through a series of steps. And that's not the frame of reference that TI has. So it's like ISFPs are happy to be told exactly how to do what they want, what the ISFP wants to do.
Yeah.
They're happy to learn how to do those things from other people because it's fourth slot and they don't expect themselves to be good at. They already know what they want to do. They're able to execute things that need to be done. They're able to make sure it conforms with a singular understanding of self and singular path. So fine, they'll delegate to somebody else how to do it.
Yeah. It's funny too, like you said that ISFPs are totally willing to accept, like a way of doing things, but from someone else. But you'd think FI would be a lot more resistant to that, like individualistic, like, oh no, I kind of want to figure out my own. But I actually
the FI decides what the ISFP wants to know how to do.
Yeah, they have TE, right? I mean, they have FI, but they've got the TE preferring.
They got TE for it, but the FI gives them certainty about what they want to learn how to do, right?
Yeah.
So, in other words, if I come in and try to teach you something else besides what you want to know how to do, and you're an ISFP, you're going to say, no, I don't want that.
Okay.
So, in other words, yes, you take instruction well in exactly what you want to take instruction in.
Yeah. This shows in our cat. I can't.
Do you guys type? Do you guys type pets as well? I sometimes type pets, even though I don't think that it's just for fun. It's not. I'm not being serious about typing a pet, but I do it.
We type our pets.
Yeah.
The cat's an ISFP.
Yeah, she's definitely an ISFP, and like she's demonstratively showing us her SI right now by grooming herself. She grooms herself more than any other cat I've ever met. and she likes her. She'll begrudgingly eat whatever food we have in the house, but she prefers a certain kind.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah.
She has.
SI. Those are more SI.
I guess.
So.
Yeah.
FI is hard to explain, but she's a very she's an extremely entitled cat who knows exactly what she wants
Yes,
at all
that's what I
times.
mean.
And
That's what I
doesn't
mean.
really have any sympathy for you and
Right.
what you want. So
No.
Yeah, the cats are certainly less. Like I was talking with a friend about that. It's like dogs. If we're using the big five, are then cats. When comparing dogs and cats, are well. I mean, generally speaking, if we're just to generalize, if we have to do that, if we can do that, then dogs have more of the agreeable temperament. It seems cats are certainly willing to disagree with you if their preferences don't match yours. You know, so
right.
there is more of the FI complexion in cats and more of the FE complexion in dogs, which is why a lot of allusions I've heard in the past to SE is it's like, oh yeah, it's like I've got plenty of FE friends that have just been called that have like the companion nature of like people calling them dogs or something like that. I'm just like, that's horrible. Why would you call them a dog? I mean, but you get the point. They have the agreeable. There's more of a tendency toward agreeableness than toward individuation. You know, maybe.
But even among cats, I've had cats that have been much more
Same. Yeah.
concerned about when I'm communicating to them than this cat is.
Yeah.
So this cat could be sitting 5 feet from me, and I could be talking to her, saying all these nice things, saying, please come over here and let me pet you. And she might like glance at me for a second and then get back to what she's doing, just be like, F you,
Yeah.
But then I say, okay, fine, I'll go to sleep. As soon as I roll over and go to sleep, she'll be right up in my face. Okay, I'm ready for pets now.
Yeah.
Now, I've had other cats in the past who are much more considerate than she is. This is a very inconsiderate cat.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter somehow you just love the hell out of her anyway. It's kind of like an ISFP thing vibe she's got going on. ISFP can get away with a lot of shit just because of their inherent sort of FE fifth glow plus the fact that they're so authentic. It's like you can't really falter for the shit you might not like. Well, what's her answer? Well, I don't feel like coming over there and getting pet.
Yeah.
And you go say, okay, well, I guess that shouldn't try to make you then.
Right. But I mean, if we're generalizing about cats, I just don't see as much of the FE there with cats. Honestly, I do see more of the inward, not so approval and approval seeking and as agreeable as dogs. But like you said, I've had cats in the past that were very affectionate and very dog-like. If we're,
I really think you got to type cats against other cats and dogs against other cats.
Yeah. Right.
We have an ESTP.
I had a very FE dog.
On the same subject, we have another cat who hangs around. He's ESTP, so he has FE.
I'm beginning to think he might be ESFP because his FE is so ham-fisted.
Oh my gosh,
he basically just keeps walking up to us and saying, I'm your cat, I'm your cat.
Yes.
And we're like,
yeah.
No, you're not.
No, you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how, I mean, both of those, I mean, we could just as easily have, it seems to narrow down to 2 because that's most convenient. But I mean, they're these 2 species that we've very much evolved alongside us and probably, I mean, wouldn't really have survived. I mean, these smaller cats that ultimately came about, I mean, it was advantageous for them to pair with us because surviving outside of our protection would have been difficult. And dogs kind of just did it because we fed them and petted them and, showed them affection. So they're just kind of
more thriving populations of feral cats than feral dogs. Cats are much more viable as a species in the humans than dogs are.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I think for one thing, cats have a deftness in hunting that comes from their being able to leap at great heights and being able to move at good speeds to catch the rodents they hunt. But with dogs, they're a little bit more clunky. They've got the blunter nails and the or claws, if you want to call them that, and it just doesn't lend as well to any kind of hunting with the dogs that we've domesticated. It just doesn't.
Well, the other thing is you have an independent contractor kind of relationship with a cat in its most natural.
Most certainly. Yes, that's the way to put it. That's the
our
way to
cat's
put it.
indoor outdoor, so she comes and goes as she pleases.
Yeah.
And of course, here's what never happened. Nobody ever calls me and says, "Your cat back here digging up my flower bed."
But with the dog,
Cats are inconspicuous.
Yeah.
You let your dog have that kind of relationship with you, or you'll run into problems with you.
yeah, cats are a little bit more, for what I mean, this is just subjective, but they've got an elegance about them that kind of makes them, you know, they're not as prone to making those types of errors as dogs, even though dogs are more agreeable. I don't get it.
They're nature ninjas.
You know.
It's so true though. I'll be in the front yard with Piki, and the space that we're at is very close to the house, but there's a big yard in front. So I don't even know how these people see her. And they're like, "Oh, you have such a beautiful cat." And I'll be like, "Thank you." But
She is a lovely kitty.
I know, it's funny. There's this weird like Tumblr trend among introverts where it's like, oh, cats are more the oh, there she is, or he is. Cats are like the pet for the introverts, and then dogs are the pet for the extroverts, or whatever. Even though I prefer dogs as an introvert, I'm not sure why, but I mean, as a pet anyway. So, but yeah, it's pretty common, I think. I think we've bred up and incentivized FE in dogs and cats. That just wasn't their nature to begin with. So that's why we type them that way.
I haven't typed the fish, though.
the fish we haven't typed, but we do have
Typing a fish.
lobsters. That's definitely an ISTJ. Well, right?
Yeah, sure. I agree with you. I agree. Our crayfish is an ISTJ.
I went through a thinker phase where I just regarded fish not as pets but as decorations, where it's just like there's no personal relationship you have with a fish just because it's a fish, and a fish is a fish, and they're just not expressive and they don't have any human qualities really. But they're really good decorations to me. I mean, if I've got a nice fish tank, I mean, in the back, it's a nice betta fish or something. But that was a long time ago. Now I don't necessarily feel that way about them. They seem to have, minds too.
Rachel and I definitely feel like attachment to at least certainly crayfish, and we also have the bluefish, William and Betty, and they're the only cichlids that we have left. We didn't get the idea of cichlids at first, and we got several
So
different
many.
kinds of stuff. We just took them home. They were all so small at first, but they all grew up a lot, and they started attacking each other.
Yeah, talk about FE. There was like not much FE in that tank.
So our favorite one was Kevin, but ultimately Kevin lost his wife in the war.
Yeah.
And so then the only surviving couple was William and Betty, and so we released Kevin in the lake, and now we just have William and Betty as the only cichlids, along with the guppies and the crayfish.
The war is in the Great Fish Wars. The great
Fish Wars of several months ago.
Yeah. But I think that may link to feeling too. Is like I find even with my experience with both FE and FI users, they'll even project feelings onto inanimate objects. I have many. It's not, and this isn't even something that it's not serious, right? Because it's just conceptual. It's not like they actually think that a cup has feelings. But
you'll hear you.
But I've definitely it's been consistent that I've known both FI and FE users that will, if they drop something, will apologize to the thing they dropped.
Yeah. Especially if it's their phone.
Yeah, but it's a genuine apology, or at least it's an affected one.
Yeah, I remember my assistant coach pointing that quality out. Back when, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago or something, there was this girl who dropped her phone, and she if you like bumped into some other person or something, but instead of worrying with the other person at all, she bent down and made like this serious apology to her phone.
Yeah. But as we said, FE isn't the same thing as empathy or sympathy.
No,
Yeah.
no. I think those more authentic, sort of vulnerable kind of emotions all linked to FI. So when I see something that I can't watch because it's the wrong kind of sad, too sad or something like that, then trouble, you need to go away.
I can't believe so he's a tomcat who just keeps on coming back. He wants pee-pee, but he can't have pee-pee because pee-pee doesn't have her stuff. She's a queen. So
She's unsexable.
yeah. But he doesn't get it. And then he because we feed him, but
Until recently, we've had an understanding around here, and he has decided to make. And he thinks it's humping season. She's not going into the heat. That's our working at process. Hopefully, he'll get the message here soon.
Yeah.
I'm getting sidetracked. I'm sorry.
sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I know the pets are like if it without they're definitely an endless source of fascination.
It's the endless source of humanity that's really for us.
Yes, I know. That's what you trade. That's what you trade. You trade. The responsibility to feed them and take care of them, but ultimately there's a benefit to the trade we have with them. So. Yeah, because the only reason I ask is there's this just weird trend where there's this association between FE and empathy, but I'm not even sure if that's I agree. I think that's more FI. It could even be. It doesn't even have to be a feeling function that's empathetic though. I know that's not inherently a feeling thing. It's an imaginative thing too, or an intuitive thing, or even a thinking thing. I mean, trying to.
No, I think it's inherently a feeling thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a thinking thing, certainly, but.
But the thing is, for you, FI is your most hard to understand function. For me, I think SE, I can never catch myself SE. I'm not quite sure what paying attention that way looks like. It seems to always have happened by the time before I have a chance to glance at almost, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so the thing about FI is, FI explains why I worry about the cat while we're gone next weekend in Indianapolis. It's because it includes harm prevention as part of FI.
Oh my
okay?
god, my TE is so bad. I did not count her in at all.
That's okay. I didn't think about it. And FI is also why sometimes I'll wake up mad in the morning. I wake up at somebody who wronged Rachel or a friend of mine a long time ago or whatever,
Yeah.
I usually don't wake up mad at people who wronged me because I haven't been victimized very much.
Right.
That's FI. It's like FI linked to SI. My SI is weak, so I'm not really thinking about these things. I somehow dream about them or whatever, and I wake up angry at the cops who abused Taylor's rights some years back, for example. That's like remembering what was important from a sense of sacredness and violation, Like this person's sacred self was violated by oppression in some regard, is an FI consideration.
Do you think that ethics are inherently kind of like an aspect of math where they're just values that we can't prove are valid, but we assume are valid? Or can thinking focus on ethics as well and try to establish reasons why, rationally, why things are ethical or unethical?
Well, I
That's a
mean,
really interesting. Like I'm
all
generally
ethics,
curious about
to
your
the extent,
response to that.
to the extent that ethics are logically defensible, they all follow from a single principle that an individual owns their own body and is born owning it,
Right.
and that ownership means certain specific things. For example, might be defined as the exclusive right uh, to destroy, or the exclusive right uh, to utilize uh, as a default, or something like that. In addition, it's predicated on the notion that the self is owned but unsellable because it includes a will that you cannot sell in any way other than fraudulently.
Yeah.
In other words, I don't sell myself as a slave to somebody because I'm selling them my free will, which they can't actually possess. It's always via either my agreement one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. I really have a hard time with that because I mean I'm always trying to apply ethical debates are important, but I'm always trying to apply TI to them, and I'm always I always struggle with. I mean, I almost have to just assume this is valid and then work with it, but I don't want to do that because there has to be
You don't
a
have to do it that way. You can think about it like this. It comes down to a willingness to begin the conversation by answering a question. It is the case that people either affirm the idea of self-ownership and that you were born owning your own body and what that entails, or they don't. Okay. However, it's also the case that almost nobody affirms the alternative to it, which is slavery. So
yes, right,
if a person is willing to engage that question honestly and state a position and stake a position on it, then they open themselves up to using ethics to rationally conclude the negative side of the moral equation, which is to say that which is morally prohibited universally. That's all you can logically conclude. None of the positive side, what you should do, cannot be deduced from any logical framework, and there's no predominant logical framework that can give you any meaningful guidance on that. And every
yeah,
attempt to create a universalizable positive obligation produces a clusterfuck of disasters on an intuitive level. So in
yeah,
other words, if in fact we do think there's an obligation to help people who are poorer than us, then we must all go bankrupt until we're all equally poor.
yeah. I always find myself. I mean, even with ethics, I know that connecting it to FE, it's like ethics are what is ethical, right? So ethics are what is ethical is very much attached to an estimation of like what the norms are, what the ethical norms are, what the rules happen to be in like an SI kind of FE way or even just an FE way. But it's genuinely when as contraposed to or contrasted to TI, it's much more. I feel it's much more difficult for me to say what happens to be right in any given situation than it would be for someone who assumes the validity of the ethical norm, which I really don't by nature.
Well,
So
okay, look, but you think of it like this. Look at the COVID thing. We've got a variety of different possible kind of responses, okay? So let's look first just at the judging functions. You've got FI, which is harm prevention. It says, do whatever necessary to save lives.
yeah,
You've got TE, which
yes,
is outcome oriented, which says, no, let's just do things that actually have good effectiveness. Let's make sure things are effective.
yeah,
Okay? You've got FE, which says, let's make sure everybody virtue signals. Okay.
right,
And it's got TI, which says, hold on, what's with all this everybody shit? Let's make everybody. Let's look at the first part of everybody else's sentence here, which is let's make everybody.
yeah,
So that's what TI says, right? Now, if you're looking at how the S's and the N's impact the equation, the S at I will impact it by going, all right, well, what do I have that's comparable in my experience? Now, with the COVID shit, it got painted as such a non-comparable, nothing comparable in the past. It was very deadly and got really overblown and everything. So instead, the SI people respond not with comparing to anything comparable in the past, but going, oh no, it's scary, it's new. the SE people say, look, whatever it is, let's just do something. And that's
NTE.
we got to do something, and that's what you do when there are problems, right? You do some shit and all of a sudden the frame changes.
Yeah.
And then the NE people go, yeah, but what if you do this and that's not going to work, and here's another reason why it might not work, and here's another reason why it might not work, and another reason why it might work. Or here's another thing we can do, another thing we can do, another thing we can do. And NI goes, are we putting a hat on a flamingo? I'm not sure if this is making sense. In other
Right,
words,
yeah.
is there any holistic vision here? Or it's like NI shows a picture of scribbly lines that says, and memes it as our COVID policy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The thing is, what's winning the equation right now? FE.
Yeah.
Everybody's first thinking about it.
Yeah.
There's no actual purpose to it, because every time you go in the world and you want to engage with somebody with your mask and they can't hear you, which is half the time, everybody does this. Blah, 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 blah. Let me say so you can hear me, and puts it back on. The other person takes their mask off and goes blah, 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 and then puts it back on.
Yeah.
So, of course, there's zero fucking point in wearing the mask at all. It's just virtue signaling, right? You go into a restaurant, you're required to wear the mask until you're sitting at your table and eating, in which case you're not required to wear a mask. But if it is in fact safe enough for you not to wear a mask while eating, why is it not safe enough for you not to wear a mask walking through the restaurant?
Yeah.
And the implication is always going to be, well, there's some minor positive impact we can claim without any calculation of assorted various negative impacts, or even consideration of possible unintended impacts, or consideration of other people's experience at all.
And I think masks are mostly a redundancy, because distancing is adequate. I mean, you just keep a certain distance from each other, even if you're without a mask. It's just.
Why was the world shut down for a year waiting for a vaccine? The vaccine's out now.
Yeah.
So the problem's over, right? Because anybody who wants to make sure they don't get COVID can get vaccinated, right?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's not over yet. Well, why not? Because too many people aren't vaccinated. Really? I mean, so if those people aren't vaccinated and they get COVID, what's the problem? They chose not to get vaccinated. They chose to get COVID. They got COVID. Why are you so freaking out for them?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You can definitely see different functions playing out with how people respond to something like this. I mean,
should TI be the predominant frame on matter of public policy? Absolutely, it should. But it should come first in an order of frames. First comes the TI frame. Is this thing we're talking about legitimate? Does it make sense? Does it pass TI muster? If it does, fine. Now we use TE. And we solve the fucking problem as best we can.
Yeah.
Check the TE periodically TI to make sure TE is not going off the rails and saying, well, let's just exterminate this Indian presence in our way.
Yeah.
As TE tends to do,
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, and for one thing, on ethics and policy with regard to COVID, it's like, I feel like TI definitely has something to say. Certainly has something, well, not just something to say. It's something more than just something to say. It definitely has some logic to put forward. It's with ethics, though, I will say on a side note, applying I think TI is a thinking method, and so there are limitations with any given thinking method that you have, depending on what you apply it to. There may be limits with what you can apply a certain thinking method
its
to.
Its job is just to check for legitimacy. Once it passes legitimacy, get out of the way, let TE do its job.
Yeah, okay.
TE needs to afford TI its job, right? Which is, TI, make sure what I'm doing is legitimate. Because if it's not, now here's the thing. Let's say some law is passed that doesn't pass TI scrutiny. In other words, TI people go, this is a bombardment of rights with phosphorus bombs. And it's a complete fucking oppressive nightmare.
Yeah.
Well, TI might go, but the impacts are really important, we need to do it. TI's response should always be the same. Then do your job better, fucktards.
Yeah.
Solve the problem in a way that includes fewer ancillary harms, includes fewer compromises with basic ethics,
yeah,
and actually accounts for all the fucking impacts, not just the ones you want to cherry pick.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It shouldn't be no TE, you can't have your way at all. It should be do a good job instead of a shitty job, TE.
Yeah.
Because you can do better TE that's more attentive to actual concerns, or you can do shitty ham-fisted TE that's less attentive. And this thing here, I'm not objecting to it in principle. Yeah. I'm saying you did a shitty job of creating a version of it because it fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, that's and as you're talking right now, I'm kind of realizing that in many ways, like you know, Fe and Te as functions are they? Would you agree that both of them are pretty consensus based, as in they do because we mentioned EJR and D earlier, and I only want to mention him because his videos were. I don't know if you've watched a good number of them, but they're all very good. But just to plug, just to link people to his videos. But in any case, he mentions that like TE is group logic and TI is more likely to depart from group logic for the sake of validity and legitimacy, as you're pointing to.
That's wrong.
Yeah, I think so too. I wouldn't necessarily stick by that, but I'm wondering why you'd say it's wrong.
Okay. The TE is a matter of attention that figures out the logic of specific systems that have their own logic. So TI is the universal logic of communication.
Okay.
Everything else has its own logic. I can't apply the logic of a bicycle to a door.
Yep.
It doesn't apply at all. I have to figure out each logic independently. TE figures out all those various logics of dynamic systems in the world that aren't communicative.
Yes. Okay.
And so as a consequence, the frame of reference that TE brings to it is as an interface function. Interface functions need to operate in conjunction with knowledge functions because deliberation functions take too long.
Yeah.
Whereas deliberation action types view the world more in a turn-based way. I'll have a chance to figure out what I want to do, then I'll take my turn. Knowledge interface types, they think they're much more dealing with more systems that are far more responsiveness than that.
Yeah.
So instead of time to deliberate out who's right, they look at the heuristic. Well, who's got more credibility? Who's got more fancy letters? Who's got more whatever? And then that's how they make their decisions without having to shift their basic frame of reference, which is interface knowledge, not action deliberation.
Right. TE assumes the bicycle works, and then analogizes other situation or other things to that of a bicycle, and then applies the logic of the bicycle to other things. Whereas TI questions how the bicycle works.
Don't do that. No, you keep imposing your TI frame of universality. TE says this. The bicycle works in its own way, and I can figure out what's wrong with it by examining it and looking at how this moves and this moves. Like an ISTJ, if you say to an ISTJ, I've got this problem. I can't get this blade off of this bandsaw and replace it with a new blade, which is the problem I have, okay? What does he do when he first approaches the problem? He sits there and he looks at the thing for a long time.
Yeah.
And tries to determine its logic, not applying to other things at all.
Yeah.
Because they understand that its logic is unique to it. It doesn't apply to anything else. That applying shit to other things, that's NI and TI.
Yeah.
NI demonstrative saying, oh, it must be part of a larger pattern then. Only for NITIE people and not for SITE people.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you clarified that because the whole similarity in terms of between FE and TE. I mean, I know that they're both. I'm not sure the term you use for it. They're both are they both interfacing functions?
They're both interface functions. FE interfaces with dynamic social systems.
Yes.
Which include like other people's perceptions of you, other people's perceptions of other people, what drives, where a person's pride is, how you can protect someone's pride to get what you want versus threaten their pride to get what you want, those kind of things, TE deals with non-universal. So that's universal in the sense that all people are social animals, and they all have some fundamental social rules that apply to them. In other words, they can be made to feel good or bad about themselves. They have things they want and things they don't want. They understand themselves as either above or deferential to various people in various contexts.
Yeah.
And express that in various ways. All that shit is the universal language of FE. TE is instead figuring out what's the specific mechanics of this system.
Yeah.
So when I was a director of a debate school, I had to produce a bunch of curriculum with a bunch of lesson plans. I had to convert how I teach kids into executable recipes of time for teachers. That's me doing the TE that I'm most comfortable with, which is the TE objects up here in the metaphysical field. But the actual attentional matter itself is down here on the literal field. So in other words, I have to examine the situation and construct the the instructions according to its own logic, the logic of this classroom teaching this curriculum, and
Yeah.
not according to some universal logic.
Yeah. Yeah. So I totally get the distinction you make. I mean, like the reason you call it interfacing, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like TI then is TI to contrast the two. FE and TE are working within systems in an interfacing way, and TI more takes more of a conceptualizing position where it's conceptualizing about the system rather than working within it.
I mean, I see them as conversions, so that TE converts the logic, the dynamic logics of the physical, of the external metaphysical, of the external physical field into static objects on the external metaphysical field. So in other words, I can either figure out the logic of thing here, or I can try to explain it. I can try to break something down ordinally up here.
Yeah.
So basically, the intentional manner, when it's robustly used, is used on the external physical field, which is to say, whatever the system is you're examining. It might be a company IPO. How are you going to execute this IPO or something? That would be something like an ENTJ.
Yeah.
Would have good E about, right? Or
Yeah.
it could be how to extend this bathroom's plumbing to accommodate this new shower head you're putting in. That might be something that either NITE or SITE might be good at, you know?
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you want to write a book about it, you're probably well suited to be demonstrative TE, like ENTP.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of FE and TE, and maybe contrasting that with FI and TI, like how do those different? Because I know FI and TI are both deliberative, and FE and TE are both interfacing. What is each of their relationships with like facts? Like how do they determine what are the facts in any given situation? Will the deliberators have a different approach to what happens to be a fact in any given system or situation? And maybe the FE and T users are willing to assume the validity of certain things to advance within that system, and the deliberators are perhaps more skeptical of the conclusions that perhaps FE and TE try to advance within systems, and maybe questioning the systems a little bit more deeply, or maybe.
Well, you've got two different kinds of deliberators: those paired with extroverted intuition and those paired with extroverted sensing.
Yes, right.
Those paired with extroverted sensing, ISFPs,
yes,
ISTPs.
That's very relevant. Yeah.
They have a different. Their TI behaves much more exclusively as an object function, which is to say, something comes up to them and makes them the object of words or I'd say a circuit board.
Yeah.
And then TI kicks in to parse it out and understand the object. But the thing is, because they're both unipolar, they're never the author of any of those objects. So as a consequence, they kind of never use TI as a subject. In other words, they're never trying to make their way through the world by saying all the right things. They're instead making their way through the world by eliminating all the wrong things being said, either because they don't like the way it makes them feel, or because they don't make sense.
Yeah.
If it's ISTP versus ISTP versus ISTP. So the thing is, with the deliberators of any though, it's they're much more self-absorbed because they're the author of most of the objects that they're deliberating about.
Yeah.
For INFP, they're primarily concerned with FI, which is about realities. But instead of dealing with the realities directly, they generate their own objects about realities and deal with those objects.
Yeah.
So it makes it especially distant from any sort of sensible stack, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. I mean, what if like you had theoretically, I mean, I know that the system is constrained, so this really couldn't arise. And I think the way that you define the functions, it really couldn't. But what if, and you could immediately shoot down the what if question, because this is just more NE than it is TI. But Um, what what would it look like if a person like paired instead of having like FESI, like if it were possible, what would it look like if they had maybe like FENE, you know, or something
So
like that?
it's a good way to falsify that possibility is to ask this question. If a person had FE and then any, they would uh, they would instead of going like, "Hey, how you doing? Good to see you," and then you're like, "Great to see you too," and then they move on to the next thing, knowing that what you meant was, "It's actually great to see you."
Yeah.
They immediately launch into what could he possibly mean by that? In other words, it's impossible to pair the two. You want to
Yes.
be effective FE, you can't be constantly questioning all the possible meanings of what the
Yep.
other person is thinking,
Yep.
because that would make it impossible to interface effectively.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I agree. I think that it would be they're just two fundamentally different. I mean, the creativity divergent perhaps connection making of NE with the norm and approval seeking of FE, it just wouldn't make any sense. I mean, which is why I only pose it as a hypothetical kind of NE thing rather than a TI proposition.
The thing is, we've got your basic, what you call your epistemology functions, also your inferred functions, which are your deliberation and your knowledge function. It's always the case in every one of the types. You've got a subject function, which is either to say an action function or an interface function, that is paired with an agent or an object function, which is to say a knowledge or deliberation function. And the reason is because to take action via by an action function is to require a more robust kind of epistemology than to interface. Interface expects the impacts of every given moment throughout the interface to have limited amount of to have sort of a negative feedback loop. So they're like, as long as I'm smooth throughout almost all the conversation, if I slip up one time and embarrass myself a little bit by calling somebody by the wrong name, it's not a big deal. I still made an overall good impression, right?
Right.
So with interfacing, there's an expectation of some room for error. Whereas with action, there's an expectation that the idea of a critical error or a fatal mistake that causes your whole plan of action to collapse.
Yeah.
So as a consequence, the action types need to have deliberated out more of their proposed course of action than do interface types, because they're not expecting themselves to have room to wiggle around on the way.
Yeah. Now, if with what you say about action and deliberation, like theoretically, then if we're maybe wanting to posit that there is some concept of duality or between any two types, you'd want would you want deliberation types to be paired with action types or knowing types, or I mean, would that not be ideal? Or
I think that socionics is basically right about duality for what are conventionally called judgers, which is to say deliberators or interfacers. So, in other words, if you have FE DOM, I believe, in fact, that probably a TI DOM is your ideal mate. However, if you are an NE DOM, I don't think that an SI DOM is your ideal mate. And the reason is because the perceiving functions ultimately set the frame of reference if they're in the dominant slot. And they still kind of set the frame of reference in the second slot too, because that's what perceiving functions do. And then judging functions, quote unquote, kind of execute under those frames of reference. So in other words, if I'm NIFE, I'm going to, and I'm asked the question, what was the most memorable moment from Hawaii? I'm going to set the frame of reference, which is things you remember are general things, not specific things. And I'm going to say,
yes,
with changing weather, and then I'm going to execute it with FE, which means I'm going to convey with body language and with vocal tones that I'm interested in the conversation, that I'm excited to be contributing, and all this other shit makes
It's interfacing. Yeah.
You're okay. We're fine. Everything's good.
Yeah. It's the social interfacing function then, FE.
So I think as a consequence, the perceivers should be with each other, like
Yeah.
NI-DOM and NE-DOM, because there's too much of a frame conflict between SI-DOMs and NE-DOMs. Like, it's a difference between, do you want somebody to balance out your excesses or complement your strengths? And
Yeah.
SI balances out NE's excesses, but NE would rather have its strengths complemented.
Yeah. It depends on, I guess it depends on the type, what dynamic they would prefer or benefit from in their relationships. It's not always strengths enhancement. It could be something else. But um, I mean, pairing FI and TE, or pairing FE. Sorry, that was reversed. Pairing FE and TI seems like it would just very conflict producing though. You'd think, but I mean,
Yeah, users always say that.
yeah, because
You basically go, I don't want an FE DOM.
right, right. I mean, just because of the independence of TI and the conciliation to norms of FE, but that's a surface level. That's a very surface level way of looking at their dynamic. I think I wouldn't stick by them, but
I think the real reason why INTPs and ESFJs are a perfect match is because INTPs are the most infantile in their romantic style, and ESFJs are the most nurturing in their romantic style. So INTPs are fine being mothered and henpecked. They rather appreciate it ultimately, and ESFJs can't help themselves. Plus, it's like the thing is, it's the you countervalue NI, and they're NI polar. NTPs will gradually go crazy because of their NI polar, as I do with my ESFJ ex-wife. Like, you've got to be fucking kidding me, banging my head against the wall. What is wrong with this woman? So before I knew anything about cognitive functions, it's like, why can't I not get through the singular, relevant, overarching, cascading down point and have you encompass it in any way? It's frustrating as hell, you know?
Yeah.
But you countervalue that anyway. That's why you got all these disclaimers and caveats and
Yeah. Yeah. Like, there just seems to be some kind of natural magnetism between. I don't know why it happens this way, but yeah, there seems to be something that TI has that FE lacks that FE wants, and something that FE has that TI lacks that TI wants, and that's proven true in my past relationships. But I mean, not due to any kind of necessity. It was just more a dynamic that arose because it had to between any two individuals, not because. But yeah, you'd think it wouldn't work, but conceptually, actually, it's only surface. It's only a surface level estimation of things to say that it wouldn't necessarily work.
I think the compatibility really comes from having the 2-3 reversed and 6-7 reversed. So it's like, I'm quite confident an ENTP could have a good relationship with either an ISFJ or an INFJ, because fundamentally they want to give what the other person wants to receive with their tool and third. So like, I want to be.
Oh yeah.
I want to be more than fair. So in other words, the person can never critique me for being unfair, because I always try to give a little bit more than I take. And all I want in return basically is acknowledgement of that and appreciation.
Yeah.
So that I have to won't worry about my self-worth on my own, so that I get the other partner to say, I validate you constantly. So The thing is, the TI third has the opposite thing. They're willing to do the validation, but they want to make sure things are actually fair.
Yeah.
So that's complementary. And then on the backside, it's like people are inept in their 7 slots. If you are good at it and not countervaluing it, then it'll annoy you.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's in your 6 slot, then it won't annoy you. You just think it's cute or doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, agreed. I mean, I know when people imagine relationships, it's always this. As a TI user, you mentioned that it's an infantile kind of process, and it very much is of me. But I don't know if that's true for all INTPs. But I mean, yeah, the whole motherly thing, that's actually would be beneficial, because I think I don't know why this happens to be the case. It could just be the low SI and the low SE and the low TE and the low NI of NTPs, but having a more grounded present, because we don't necessarily need someone who's going to be like, is that necessarily valid logically, or does that make sense? Because we're already asking that question of ourselves. So it would be redundant.
We're lacking the sensing side of things. So one way or another, we're going to get gratification from that. So with the third and seventh in INTP, they're going to be much more clear on where they get the gratification and how, so in other words, being handed food regularly while you're stuck at the computer for 6 hours.
Yeah, that's exactly what.
As a blessing you cannot turn away from, frankly.
Yes, yes, I can see that being an immensely beneficial thing, because I don't focus on those things very
right, and you're happy to delegate it as long as it's meeting your selfish third slot SI needs.
Yeah.
So, whereas my selfish third slot FE doesn't want to delegate it, I can be popular myself, mommy.
Yeah.
Your third slot SI goes, feed me again, mommy, when I get hungry, without me reminding you or telling you, because I'm not going to remember. That's why you need FESI.
Yeah.
Because you're going to remember all the ideas and words and stuff, but just like you're not going to remember how to use the power tools with your muscle memory, you're not going to remember to pay attention to your own hunger. Ideally, she'd not only feed you, but she'd bring a bucket for you to pee in while you're sitting at the desk, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, being an FE user, she'd also recognize why that's totally inappropriate, and she'd force me to use the toilet or something like that, you know?
Right. She'd say, but if nobody was coming over, it'd be fine.
Yes, if no one was coming over, I mean, I think any.
Don't ever tell anybody about this.
Yeah, I think any computer latched, your stereotypical TI user, is going to see the bucket as like, yeah, it's just expedient. I can empty it. I'm not going to smell it. You know, it's an easy way
to take it away after you're done.
Yeah. Yeah. Because ideally, I mean, that would be the utility reason for relationships is, you know, we have to do less work individually because someone else is keeping track of the things we find difficult, you know.
The other thing about INTPs is they're God's definition of neurotic. So, and I tell you who's irrationally non-neurotic is the ESFJs. Even if they should be neurotic about something, it escapes their notice because they're an bipolar, and they go about life with this irrational confidence and warm.
Yes.
You just can't break with your neurotic TI.
No, and the thing that proves what you're saying is if you were to eliminate the neuroticism, you'd probably eliminate the TI in a person. You know, I mean, so the link that you're positing between the two is probably valid.
And, I mean, you're so neurotic because you got both deliberation functions taking up a lot of your attention. You got not only TI DOM, as all TI DOMs, you also have FI8. So your most
my FI.
The most steadily reliable backside function is your 8th. You'll demonstrate the 6th most. Your most conscious one is your 6th. Your most reliable is your 8th. Your 5th is good only for judging externals, and your 7th is just a moment-to-moment sort of, oh, this thing.
Yeah.
And then it's gone.
Yeah, I've definitely been paired with another INTP before, romantically, and it mostly just amounted to, it just wasn't productive for either individual, really. It was just, I mean, you know, it just doesn't, in terms of duality, it's fun, but it's very fun ideation.
All right, now let's work our way back up the other side of these 6 hours of parenthetical tangents.
Yeah, no, it's more of the same thing, which, you know, from the productivity and growth perspective doesn't really make sense. You know, you'd want to eliminate redundancy to promote value.
I find that
and they don't need.
I think I tend to be kind of feels kind of incestuous.
Like they're siblings or something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd agree.
I've never been with an ENTP, but I've hung out with like an attractive young ENTP woman, and immediately noted like I totally have this familial kind of feeling towards her. Like even though
Yeah.
she's sloppy and her boobs falling out of her shirt. I don't even look. It's like I'm not even interested because she's just such an ENTP. It's just like me with boobs, you know. It kind of
Yeah.
answers the age-old question: if you had boobs, would you play with them? My
Yeah.
answer is no, I probably wouldn't because they'd be my boobs and it would be boring.
The there's this one idea that I've come across that the aspirational self of the INTP is like the ESFJ, or because you're weak in one area, you aspire to be good in that area inherently because it's an insecurity point or something like that. I don't know if I agree with the characterization that it's an ideal, any kind of ideal. It's like any kind of aspiration, but
I
from
mean, I think that I think you can't help but admire your duel a little bit
yeah,
because they're just the thing that you're willing to self-deprecate about. They're so naturally in the flow of.
yeah,
But I don't think it's really aspirational because it's more like
yeah. I don't think so either. Really, that's just something I come across, not something I hold to.
I think your actual self is aspirational,
Oh
and
yeah,
your
certainly,
and
yeah,
this part of you that goes, oh, I I was too much me again. You know, either too deliberative, I missed another opportunity, I hesitated too long for an ITP, or I just spouted off out of random again some shit, piss people off if you're an ENTP. That it's like
I have a
you kind of
ENTP story for
you
you, by
kind of
the way.
go, okay, if I could just incorporate my friend Joe more, right, which is your fourth law function. It's not that you want to be like I don't want to be an ISFJ, you don't want to be an ESFJ, but what it is when we experience trauma, we assume because we're always kind of pushing it
Yep,
that once again
I know where you're
we
going.
were too much of ourselves. We
Yeah,
indulged ourselves too much in our habituated preferred functions.
yep,
And that if we had included our fourth more, we would have been much better off.
yep. Funny ENTP story. I've only ever been friends. Like I've only ever been close friends with one ENTP, but maybe you'd think this is ENTP. This could easily be any kind of weak FE or FSI person. He would he would very readily exploit social norms to turn them on their heads and make jokes and then make everyone feel uncomfortable in the process. He would do this thing where we'd be walking along the sidewalk, at night, like this was in college. We'd just be walking on the sidewalk to some other destination, and just to intentionally insult like the social norms of any given situation, oncoming groups, right? We'd be coming toward oncoming groups of people like they're just talking and doing what we're doing. He would make it a point to walk straight into them. He was almost FE defiant, but in like a clever way. I can't describe it to you. But he would,
It's like an ESTP move, really, more
oh, it
than
could
E.
be. It could be. I mean, I either ESTP but I don't know what that is. Like that's now that we're talking about FE and this one, that is the antithesis of FE. I mean, he just
Well,
walked
it's a
straight in.
certain dominance.
Yeah, I think it was mostly that he just wanted to be funny, and he only cared that we found it funny and not that they found it uncomfortable.
Right. It's also like uh, he's establishing his place within the group, and he's establishing the group's place against the other group.
Yes, but I've always just like in my mind, it's always been like, you know, why the fuck? I mean, because it's just I don't know, but that
He's selfish FB with SE instead of NE.
yeah,
Means people make some sort of comments
right.
or something. Or would
I don't
we
know.
would do that. Like as you're walking by the other group. So anyway, after the alien was done probing me, I was like, what the hell is going on here? Just like you're in the middle of a regular conversation. That'd be like an ENTP way to play that same kind of angle, but
Yes.
in a way it's more funny for the group and with less metaphysical consequence for the other group.
Yes, and this was just. I mean, ever since I've I certainly don't do that. I mean, I'm enough FE valuing. I'm not going to just directly for the sake of an SE humor thing. I'm not going to walk into the oncoming group or anything like that. Well, and I write my TI is like, or any kind of utility cause and effect thing is like, yeah, and I could run into them and it could cause an accident and people could get hurt or something like that. And so, but yeah, I think you're right. That's definitely SE because it's not really
Like,
consequential.
for example, any tool preventing you from executing notions.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it. I mean, I'm not going to cause. So then, but it is SE because it's not adopting a consequentialist framework when it does that, or any kind of
But
cause
the
and
other
effect.
thing to note is that you thinking it might be an ENTP thing is an indicator of you being SE polar, mistaking SE for something else,
Yeah,
which people typically do with their polar.
yeah, yeah. It's because of how ENTPs are described on online forums. It's like you're the if it's like the debater type that then with his original perspectives upends the norm and then kind of exploits norms to make jokes about the norms, but also to get. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, that's just how when you're getting into this stuff, that's what you come across. It's these really superficial ENTP examinations that aren't really functionally based. They're just kind of like
They don't just distinguish between ENFPs and ENTPs, really.
Yeah.
They say, they're quirky, they're clever, they're whatever. Well,
Right.
ENFPs can be those things too, but there's a huge difference between ENTPs and ENFPs.
Yeah.
ENFPs have this sort of like chip on their shoulder against the world that ENTPs has. He does the inverse of, which is like, oh well, the world's whatever it is, as long as people are laughing and clapping, I'm happy. There's more of that, much more of that quality in ENTPs than there is in ENFPs, who tend to whose life gets smaller and smaller as they get older because the FI tool forces them to make hard choices all the time that ENTPs don't have to make.
Yes, right. The ethics, maybe. Am I correct in saying that these would be ethics choices rather than?
Or I mean, you could call them ethics. Ethics is typically a term reserved for sort of public affairs, but like ENFPs, I consider them the compromisers. And
Oh yeah,
in certain circumstances, compromise can be important and good, but in lots of circumstances, what's needed is a principled stance. In other words,
yeah,
sometimes the thing is, well, you should get 70%, you should get 30%. But sometimes that's like cutting the baby in half, right? And then you both get half a dead baby. Neither of you gets anything worth anything.
yeah, exactly. Right.
So the thing is, ENFPs don't get that latter half of things. And so they tend to apply the former approach to everything.
Yeah.
ENFPs tend to apply the latter approach to everything, saying, no, compromise is not okay. We go with what is correct.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's TI.
ENFPs have this weird consequence of their ideation that comes from having it linked to what matters to them all the time. Whereas ENTPs, their ideation links to
Yes, they're very different. Yeah.
What matters universally much more because
Yeah.
their NI has more value because it's not linked to the particular FI.
Yes, and also, I mean, it can't be we can't leave it unnoted that ENFPs have the tertiary TE, so they're not TI. Obviously, they're not TI valuers like ENTPs are. I know with my ENFP friend, if I'm going to propose some weird innovation to something, he's very TE. He's not going to go along with. He's not really going to. He's going to consider the sort of TE facts of the situation and then evaluate my position on those TE facts. And with respect,
that's the other thing about ENFPs is why their sort of life gets smaller. It seems like from an outsider's perspective, is because they're partway involved in ordinal processes that they've initiated before.
yes,
the NE is restrained more than it is in the ENTP. It's like why is
yeah,
never more than
definitely
never closer than never right next to each other. Well, part of the reason is because they don't go well together. In the ESTJ, the NE plays out as what could possibly go wrong. That's all it plays as. Or
yeah, that's
where might I want to go on vacation.
Yeah, that's the only way they operationalize NE is in considering what could practically go wrong, and the what question of what could is the NE aspect of the TE process of trying to, you know, make sure that my plan is good, you know, or
Right.
that it
Trying
works.
to make the approximation of ordinalities be strong enough to actually provide a meaningful map of the world to come. So in other words,
Yeah.
like when my dad put my mom in a nursing home, he researched the financial stability of each of the nursing homes because he anticipated the possibility the nursing home might go out of business and he'd have to
That's hilarious. Yeah. I would never
find
consider
the
that.
I mean, yeah, who does that, right?
Yeah.
Well, ESTJs do that shit because that's why they use their extroverted intuition.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, frequently is the occasion when I'll say I think to myself about my dad, like, okay, Dad, you're trying to come up with possibilities too soon. You need to wait until these things are determined, then we can talk about the possibilities. Because until these things are determined, half of the possibilities we're talking about are moot because they're irrelevant. And there's no reason guessing that far down the conditionality chain.
Yes, and also, you know, when if you consider too far the conditionality chain to begin with, you put the cart before the horse, and so it's just not probable that something like that's going to happen. Then you base your whole plan on some improbable catastrophe that just isn't really going to come about, and then so I would never even consider that it would go out of business. I would just, if it does, I would adapt in the moment, I guess.
Well, what if the cart's designed to be pushed rather than pulled by the horse?
Yeah. Well, yeah,
then it's
for sure.
Put the cart on the horse, right?
Yeah. Of course, it's not a bad consideration for sure. It's just, you know, it's I guess maybe TI would be concerned with like the probability of something like that happening, or but
it'd be much worse to put the cart on top of the horse.
Oh, most certainly, yeah. Or to put
if
the horse
large enough, you can put the horse on top of the cart.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was certainly going to say that it would be entirely unproductive to put the horse inside of the cart. Which
even less productive to put the cart inside of the
horse. You just kill the horse, you know.
Now your cart and horse problem is gone.
Yeah. And you've just, in the process, you've created an entirely different and new problem. You've got a dead horse, and you've got a really dirty cart.
Well, that's why God didn't glue factories.
Yeah. But ideally, you've got multiple horses and multiple carts anyway. So if you can mess up on that particular attempt, you've got other resources. Yeah. But
if you learn out, you just have to go to wherever the horses and carts are spawning from.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, I've never had to work with either.
I like how spawning has become a verb meaning what it means in video games.
Yeah, I know. I mean, with the way that things are set up now in terms of the speed of things being produced, it's practically as if things are just being spawned. I mean, horse breeding churns out a ton of horses, and cart manufacturing produces a ton of carts, both of which are not that expensive. So yeah, it's pretty much as if they're being spawned.
And more importantly, for half the thing, you can use virtual horses and carts.
Yeah, we don't really use horses for any kind of transportation anymore. And what we could use horses for, we'd use cars for, or something like that. So now it's.
So if somebody says that, if somebody says you're putting a cart before the horse, you can say, even if you were putting the cart behind the horse, I'd still be questioning why are you using the horse?
Yep. Or why are you using that cart, or whatever. I mean, you know.
Or are you Amish?
Yeah, I know.
Should we condemn the Amish for their lack of efficiency?
There are many other reasons that the Amish probably should be condemned, both philosophically and, well, mostly philosophically.
But exclusively in terms of their impact on roads and traffic, should we condemn them for driving horse and cart?
Well, I mean, in terms of how our use of even the invention of the car and the widespread use of it is like contributing so much to climate change, it was probably better for them to remain. You know.
Have you actually measured the amount of methane released by horse farts?
I know exactly. Right. No, that's a good point.
I think it's a different gas. It might be a worse greenhouse gas than carbon.
Yeah, no,
It takes
it's
less methane to equal the total amount of warming than it does a comparable amount of carbon.
yeah. But that shows my weak NI in general. With I don't know how NI comes out in the NTP. Obviously, in certain FE types, it's more obvious. I'll just have these very simplistic, like childish NI moments where I'm just like, oh yeah, it's this thing that has produced this very large effect, and that's
We have to remember also, I mean, the Amish guy's going to be whipping the horse vigorously the whole time. He's going to be breathing hard, blowing out more carbon dioxide.
yeah. I guess the thing is whether we're willing to consider the ethics of how